The alarm started at 0300 hours, and Taman knew immediately that something was very wrong. He rolled out of his bunk in the security quarters, already reaching for his uniform. The lights in the corridor flickered red, then orange, then died completely. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Through the metal walls, he could hear the high-pitched clicking sounds of the Crick scientists panicking. Taman pulled on his boots and headed for the command center. The outpost on Veltara was small, just 15 buildings connected by covered walkways. It sat on a plateau overlooking purple forests that stretched to the horizon. He had been here for 8 months now, guarding a bunch of insectoid scientists who studied the local wildlife. It was boring work, but it paid well. The command center was chaos. Thelix, the Crick's commander, stood at the main console. His forearms moved frantically across the screens. His compound eyes reflected the warning lights, making them look like they were on fire. "Solar storm," Thelix said without looking up. His translator box made his clicking speech sound flat and mechanical. "Massive electromagnetic pulse. Primary systems are down. Backup systems are failing. External temperature will drop to lethal levels within 2 hours." Taman checked the readings. The numbers were bad. The outpost's main reactor was offline. The backup fusion cells were damaged. Life support was running on emergency power that would last maybe 4 hours if they were lucky. Outside, the temperature was already dropping as the planet's thin atmosphere failed to hold the heat. "What's the plan?" Taman asked. "Evacuation. We leave in 30 minutes. Thelix gestured to the other Cricks in the room. "Prepare the ship. Take only essential data and equipment. Everything else stays." The Cricks moved quickly. Their species did not handle cold well. Anything below 20 degrees Celsius would slow their metabolism. Below 10 degrees, they would enter a coma-like state. Below 0, they would die within minutes. Taman understood their panic. To them, this outpost was already a tomb. He found Hieri in Lab 3. She was the only other human on the base, a xenobiologist from Seoul who spent her days studying Veltara's ecosystem. She was staring at a monitor, her face pale. "They're evacuating," Taman said. "I know." She did not look away from the screen. "Taman, we have a problem." He walked over and looked at the monitor. It showed a live feed from the containment area in the lower level. 3 small creatures huddled together on the cold floor. They were covered in fur that seemed to glow faintly, shifting through blues and purples. They were tiny, maybe the size of house cats with large eyes and small paws. "Valrex cubs," Hieri said quietly. "They were born yesterday. We were studying the mother's pregnancy. But when the power surge hit, the containment field failed. The mother attacked the security barrier and was electrocuted. These 3 are all that's left." Taman watched the cubs. They were shaking. One of them made a sound, a high-pitched cry that even through the audio feed sounded desperate and afraid. "They won't survive without heat and food," Hieri continued. Their mother's body temperature was 42 degrees Celsius. "They need constant warmth for at least the first week of life. In this cold, they'll die in less than an hour. Can we take them on the ship?" Hieri shook her head. "I already asked Thelix. He said no, they're just test subjects. Not worth the risk or the space. He said we leave in 25 minutes whether we're ready or not." Taman looked at the cubs again. The smallest one had stopped moving as much. Its glow was getting dimmer. He thought about what would happen when the outpost lost all power. The temperature would drop to minus 40 degrees within 6 hours. These cubs would freeze long before that. "There's the backup shelter," he said slowly. Hieri turned to look at him. "Sub-level 3? The military bunker? It was built to human specifications. Reinforced walls. Independent power supply. It's meant to survive exactly this kind of emergency." Taman checked his watch. 23 minutes until they leave. "Taman, rescue won't come for almost a week. The storm has disrupted all the shipping lanes in this sector. We'd be alone down there with 3 dying cubs and limited supplies." "I know. The Cricks think those cubs have less than a 5% chance of survival even with proper equipment and care. We'd have almost nothing." "I know that too." Hieri studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded once, quick and sharp. "Okay, let's do it." They moved fast. Taman ran to the supply depot and grabbed everything he could carry. Thermal blankets, medical kits, ration packs, a portable fusion cell meant for emergency field operations, water purification tablets, 2 emergency environment suits. He threw it all into a cargo container and started dragging it toward the lower levels. Hieri went to the lab storage and collected scientific equipment, scanners, a portable medical unit, chemical supplies, nutrient supplements. She worked with quick, precise movements, her hands steady despite the alarms blaring overhead. They met at the elevator to sub-level 3. The power was flickering, but the elevator still worked. As they descended, Taman activated his communication link. Corporal Kang to Commander Thelix. The reply came immediately. Kang, where are you? We are loading the final equipment. You need to be on the ship in 15 minutes. I'm not coming, Commander. I'm staying at the outpost. There was a pause. Then Thelix's voice came back, sharp and confused. Explain. Dr. Choi and I are securing the backup shelter. We're going to wait out the storm here. That is not logical. The outpost will be uninhabitable. The temperature, the backup shelter will hold. It's designed for worse than this. Another pause. This is about the Valrex specimens. Yes, Commander, they are not worth your lives. They are research subjects. We have collected sufficient data. Their survival is not important. The elevator doors opened. Taman and Hieri stepped out into the cold lower level. The temperature had already dropped noticeably. Their breath formed small clouds in the air. With respect, Commander, I disagree. We're staying. Thelix's voice took on a different tone. Not angry, but something close to concern. Corporal Kang, I have reviewed human psychology files. I understand your species has strong protective instincts, but you must think rationally. Those cubs will likely die regardless of your efforts. You will have wasted your lives for nothing. Maybe, Taman said. He looked at Hieri, who was already moving toward the containment area where the cubs waited. But maybe not. Either way, this is our choice. The next rescue ship will not arrive for 6 days minimum, possibly longer if the storm continues. You will be alone. Understood. I cannot order you to evacuate. You are civilian contractors. But I strongly advise thank you, Commander. Good luck with your evacuation. Taman ended the transmission. Hieri had reached the containment area. She opened the door carefully. The 3 cubs were huddled together, their glowing fur dim and their small bodies shaking. The smallest one was barely moving at all. Help me get them into the thermal blankets, Hieri said. Taman knelt down. The cubs did not resist as he wrapped them gently. They were so small, so fragile. Their fur felt strange against his hands, soft but with a crystalline texture that caught the light. Up close he could see they were beautiful creatures. Their eyes were large and dark, filled with fear and confusion. The largest cub made a sound, something between a meow and a chirp. It pressed against Taman's chest, seeking warmth. I've got you, he said quietly. You're going to be okay. They carried the cubs to the backup shelter. It was a reinforced cube built into the bedrock of the plateau. The door was 20 centimeters of solid metal. Inside it was cramped and cold, but it was intact. Taman set down the cubs and started connecting the portable fusion cell to the shelter's power system. Above them, they heard the distant roar of the Krix ship launching. The sound faded quickly, swallowed by the howling wind that was starting to build outside. Hieri checked the cubs with her scanner. Her face was tight with worry. Their core temperature is dropping. The smallest one, she's in bad shape. How long do we have? Hours, maybe. If we're lucky. She looked up at him. Taman, did we just make a terrible mistake? He looked at the 3 tiny cubs wrapped in blankets and shivering despite the thermal coating. Outside, the storm was growing stronger. The temperature was falling. They had 6 days until rescue, limited supplies, and 3 dying alien cubs who probably would not survive the night. Ask me again in the morning, Taman said, and got back to work. The shelter door sealed shut with a heavy metallic thud that echoed in the small space. Taman felt the pressure equalize as the environmental systems kicked in. The shelter was exactly 15 meters on each side, a perfect cube of reinforced metal and composite materials buried deep in the bedrock. It had been designed by human military engineers to keep soldiers alive in the worst possible conditions. Now it was going to be home for 6 days, if they survived that long. Temperatures at 14 degrees, Hieri said, reading from the environmental controls. The fusion cell is providing power, but it's not enough to heat the whole shelter to comfortable levels. We'll need to focus the heat in one area. Taman nodded. He was already pulling equipment from the cargo containers, setting up what would essentially be a nest in the corner of the shelter. He laid down the thermal blankets in layers, creating an insulated space about 2 meters square. The portable heater went in the center, its heating elements glowing a soft orange. Bring the cubs here, he said. Harry carried them over carefully. All three were still wrapped in the emergency blankets. The smallest one, which Harry had started calling Bomb, was barely responsive. Her eyes were half closed and her breathing was shallow. The middle cub, Nari, was shaking constantly. Only the largest, Haru, seemed to have any energy left. He made small sounds and tried to move toward the warmth of the heater. "We need to get their core temperature up," Harry said. She unwrapped her scanner and ran it over each cub. Bomb is at 34 degrees. That's 8 degrees below what she needs. Nari is at 35. Haru is doing better at 36 but still too cold. How fast can we warm them? Carefully. Too fast and we could shock their systems, but too slow and they'll slip into hypothermia. She looked at the heater. The ambient heat from the heater will help, but it's not enough. They need direct body contact with something warm. Taman understood immediately. He sat down in the nest of blankets and pulled off his jacket. "Hand them to me." Harry carefully placed all three cubs against his chest. They were cold even through his shirt, their small bodies trembling. Taman wrapped his arms around them loosely, holding them close but not too tight. He could feel their hearts beating rapidly, like small drums against his skin. "Your body temperature is 37 degrees, Harry said. "That's close to what they need. This might actually work." The cubs responded immediately to his warmth. They pressed closer, their small paws kneading against his chest. Haru made a sound that was almost like purring, though it had a crystalline quality that was distinctly alien. Nari stopped shaking as much, but Bomb remained mostly still, her breathing weak. "How long do I need to do this?" Taman asked. "Until their temperature stabilizes. Could be hours." Harry was setting up her equipment nearby. "I need to prepare food for them. They should have been nursing from their mother every 2 hours. Without that, they'll starve. What do Valrex cubs eat? I'm not entirely sure. The mother's milk, obviously, but we don't have that. I'll need to create a substitute using what we have." She started pulling out chemical compounds and nutrient supplements. "It won't be perfect, but it's better than nothing." Taman watched her work. Harry moved with practiced efficiency, mixing compounds and testing them on her scanner. Her hands were steady even though he knew she must be scared. They both understood how slim their chances were. The Cricks had abandoned them. Rescue was days away, and they were responsible for 3 alien babies who were supposed to be dead already. "Why did you stay?" he asked quietly. Harry did not look up from her work. "Why did you?" "I asked first," she smiled slightly. "When I was a child in Seoul, I found a kitten in an alley. It was winter and the kitten was sick and half frozen. My mother said we should leave it, that it was probably going to die anyway. But I brought it home. I stayed up all night keeping it warm. And it lived." She measured out a carefully precise amount of protein compound. "That kitten lived for 16 years. She slept on my bed every night until I left for university. So when I saw these cubs, I couldn't just leave them, even if the odds are bad. And now I'm here trying to keep 3 alien cubs alive in a bunker during a solar storm." She laughed, but it sounded tired. "My mother would say I never learned my lesson." Taman felt Bomb shift against his chest. She was so small, so fragile. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you didn't." They fell into a routine. Harry finished preparing the nutrient solution, a milky liquid that looked nothing like what the cubs should be drinking but was the best they could do. She filled a feeding bottle, one meant for human babies from the medical kit, and brought it to the nest. "Let's try with Haru first. He's the strongest." Taman held the largest cub while Harry tried to get him to drink. At first, Haru turned away from the bottle, confused and unwilling. But Harry was patient. She squeezed a small drop onto his mouth, letting him taste it. After a few attempts, Haru began to drink. His small throat worked as he swallowed. It took 20 minutes, but he finished about 30 milliliters. Nari was next. She was more willing to drink than her brother had been, though she was weaker. She managed to take 20 milliliters before she stopped, exhausted from the effort. Then came Bomb. The smallest cub barely responded when Harry tried to feed her. She would not open her mouth. She would not turn toward the bottle. Her eyes remained half closed and her breathing had become even more shallow. "Come on, little one," Harry whispered. She tried for 10 minutes, then 20. Nothing worked. Bomb was shutting down. Taman could feel the cub's heartbeat slowing against his chest. "What do we do?" "I don't know. If she won't eat, she'll die. She's already too weak." Harry's voice was tight. "I don't know what else to try." "Give me the bottle." Harry handed it over. Taman held Bomb in one hand, supporting her tiny head. She was so light, barely any weight at all. He squeezed a single drop of the nutrient solution onto his finger and touched it to her mouth. She did not respond. He tried again. And again. One drop at a time. For an hour he sat there holding this dying cub, trying to get her to take just a little bit of food. His back ached from sitting in one position. His arms were tired, but he did not stop. Finally, after the 100th attempt, Bomb's tongue moved. Just slightly. She licked the drop from her lips. Taman felt a surge of hope. He squeezed another drop. This time she swallowed it. That's it, he said softly. Come on, just a little more. Drop by drop he fed her. It took 3 hours. By the end, she had taken maybe 15 milliliters, half what her siblings had managed, but it was something. When she was done, she made a tiny sound, almost like a sigh, and fell asleep against his chest. Hieri checked her scanner. Her temperature is up to 36 degrees. Heart rate is stabilizing. She looked at Taman with something like wonder. You did it. We did it, he corrected. He was exhausted. Every muscle in his body ached. How long until they need to eat again? 2 hours. Okay, then we have 2 hours to rest, but they did not rest. There was too much to do. Hieri continued analyzing the cubs, making notes on their biology and vital signs. Taman checked the shelter's systems, making sure everything was functioning properly. The fusion cell was stable. The life support was working. The temperature inside their small nest was holding at 18 degrees, while the rest of the shelter stayed at a cold 12 degrees. Outside, the storm was getting worse. They could hear the wind howling, a sound that came through even the thick walls of the shelter. The temperature on the planet's surface had dropped to minus 20 degrees and was still falling. We should set up a sleep schedule, Hieri said. One of us needs to be awake at all times to monitor the cubs and the equipment. I'll take the first watch. You sleep. Taman, you've been holding the cubs for 6 hours. Your arms must be exhausted. I'm fine. He was not fine. His arms felt like they were made of lead and his back was screaming at him. But he was not going to put the cubs down. Not yet. Sleep, Hieri, you'll need your energy. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She curled up in the corner of the nest, wrapped in a thermal blanket, and was asleep within minutes. Taman sat in the dim light of the shelter, holding 3 alien cubs against his chest, listening to the storm rage outside. He thought about what Thelix had said, that the cubs would probably die anyway, that this was a waste of effort, that humans were being irrational. Maybe the Crix commander was right. Maybe they were all going to die down here in this bunker, and in a week a rescue team would find 4 human and alien bodies frozen together. Maybe this was the stupidest decision Taman had ever made. But as he felt the cubs breathing, their hearts beating steadily now, their small bodies finally warm and full and safe, he could not bring himself to regret it. 2 hours later, the cubs woke up crying for food. Taman gently shook Hieri awake. She prepared the bottles while he held the cubs, keeping them calm. They fed all 3 again, and this time even Bomb drank more willingly, though she still needed patient coaxing. When the feeding was done, Hieri checked their temperatures again. All 3 were at 38 degrees now, just slightly above what they needed. Their heart rates were normal. Their breathing was steady. They made it through the first night, Hieri said quietly. Tamin looked at his watch. It was 700 hours. Day 1 became day 2 with barely any distinction between them. Time seemed to blur in the shelter. There were no windows, no natural light, just the steady glow of the emergency lights and the pulsing bioluminescence of the cub's fur. Taman and Hieri fell into a rhythm dictated entirely by the needs of 3 small creatures who depended on them for everything. Every 2 hours, the cubs woke hungry. Every 2 hours, Hieri prepared the nutrient solution, while Taman kept the cubs warm and calm. Haru was always the easiest to feed. He drank eagerly, his small throat working steadily until the bottle was empty. Nari took longer but was consistent. And Bomb, the smallest, required patience and gentle coaxing for every milliliter she consumed. Between feedings, there was work. Constant, exhausting work. The shelter systems needed monitoring. The fusion cell's power output had to be checked every 4 hours. The air filters required cleaning. The waste disposal system needed maintenance. And the cubs themselves required constant attention. Hieri had set up a monitoring station with her equipment. She tracked the cubs' vital signs continuously, watching for any change that might signal a problem. She also continued to refine the nutrient solution, adjusting the formula based on how the cubs responded to it. Their digestive systems are adapting, she said during one of the early morning feedings on day 2. The first batch I made was too acidic. I've adjusted the pH levels. They should digest this more easily. Taman watched as she worked. How did you figure that out? I've been analyzing their waste. Not pleasant, but necessary. She measured out precise amounts of different compounds. Valrek's biology is complex. Their fur isn't just for insulation. It's part of their digestive process. It absorbs certain wavelengths of light and converts it to energy. That's why it glows. So they photosynthesize? Partially. They still need food for protein and other nutrients, but they can supplement their energy needs through light absorption. She glanced at the cubs. In normal conditions, their mother would have kept them in a den with access to natural sunlight. We don't have that here. I'm trying to compensate by increasing the protein content in the formula. It was fascinating, and Taman found himself learning things about Valrek's biology he had never known. But the real education came from simply caring for the cubs. He learned that Haru liked to sleep on his back, paws in the air, that Nari preferred to curl into the tightest ball possible, that Bomb would only settle if she could feel a heartbeat against her, whether human or sibling. He learned that their fur changed color based on their mood and health. Bright blue meant they were comfortable. Purple meant they were hungry. A dim grayish color meant something was wrong. He learned that they made different sounds for different needs. A high chirp meant hunger. A low rumble meant contentment. A sharp cry meant distress. And he learned that caring for 3 infant aliens was harder than any combat situation he had ever been in. On day 2, the real cold set in. The external temperature had dropped to -35 degrees and was still falling. The shelter's walls were well insulated, but they could feel the cold creeping in. Frost formed on the inside of the main door. The temperature in the shelter outside their heated nest dropped to 8 degrees. We need to conserve power, Hieri said, studying the readouts. The fusion cell is working harder than I expected to maintain heat. If we keep using it at this rate, we might not have enough power for all 6 days. Taman made some calculations. What if we reduce the heated area? Make the nest smaller, focus all the heat there? We could, but that means less room for us to move around. We'd essentially be living in a space the size of a large closet. The cubs need the heat more than we need the space, so they reconfigured their setup. They built walls using equipment containers, creating a smaller enclosed space that was easier to heat. It left them cramped and uncomfortable, but the temperature inside their little space rose to 20 degrees. The cubs responded immediately, their fur glowing brighter as their bodies relaxed in the improved warmth. But the new configuration created a different problem. With less space, Taman and Hieri had to be in close proximity constantly. There was no room to pace, no room to stretch out properly. Sleep became difficult because any movement might wake the other person or disturb the cubs. Taman took to sleeping sitting up, his back against the wall, the cubs bundled in his lap. It was not comfortable, but it was efficient. Hieri slept curled on her side, pressed against the thermal blankets. They worked in 6-hour shifts now instead of trying to stay awake together. On the 3rd day, their supplies started to become a concern. The nutrient solution required specific compounds that they had in limited quantities. Hieri calculated that they had enough to make the formula for perhaps 4 more days if they were careful. What happens on day 6 when rescue arrives? Taman asked. We hope they bring more supplies, or we hope the cubs are strong enough by then to survive on less frequent feedings. She did not sound confident about either option. The cubs were growing. It was subtle but noticeable. Haru had gained weight. His legs seemed stronger. He could lift his head for longer periods. Nari was more alert, her eyes tracking movement around the shelter. Even Bomb, though still the smallest and weakest, had more energy than she had on that first night. But growth required food. And food required supplies they did not have enough of. Taman made a decision on the morning of day 3. Reduce our rations by half. Hieri looked up from her work. What? Our food? Cut it in half. Use the protein from our rations to supplement the cubs' formula. Taman, we're already not eating enough. You've barely had more than a protein bar a day. I can handle it. The cubs can't. He was already pulling out their ration packs, doing the math. If we cut our food intake, we can extend the cubs' formula by 2 days. Maybe 3 if we're careful. You'll be weak. If something goes wrong, if you need to make repairs then I'll deal with it. He met her eyes. We didn't stay here to watch them starve, Yeri. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, half rations. But if you pass out from hunger, I'm going to be very angry with you. Noted. The hunger was not too bad at first. Taman had been through survival training. He knew how to function on minimal food. But by day 4 it was becoming difficult. His hands shook slightly when he worked. His concentration wavered. He felt cold all the time, even inside the heated nest. But the cubs were thriving. Haru had started trying to stand on his wobbly legs. Nari had begun making playful sounds, chirping at her siblings. And Bomb, the little one who was supposed to have died on that first night, was drinking from the bottle without needing constant coaxing. On day 4, disaster struck. Taman was checking the fusion cell when he noticed the power output fluctuating. The readings were inconsistent, jumping up and down in a pattern that suggested a failing connection somewhere in the system. We have a problem, he told Hieri. She came over and looked at the readings. Her face went pale. If the fusion cell fails, we lose heat. The cubs will die within hours. I need to fix it. Can you? I don't know, but I have to try. The fusion cell was located in the main part of the shelter, where the temperature was a brutal 8 degrees. Taman stripped down to his undershirt to preserve his warmer layers for later, and crawled under the main console where the cell was housed. The metal was so cold it burned his skin when he touched it. The problem was immediately obvious. One of the power conduits had cracked during the initial power surge. It had been holding together by luck and some hastily applied sealant, but now it was failing. Sparks jumped across the crack every few seconds. Taman needed to replace the conduit, but they did not have a replacement. What they had was spare parts from various other equipment, none of it designed for this purpose. He would have to improvise. He worked for 6 hours straight in the freezing cold. His fingers went numb within the first hour. By the second hour, he could barely feel his hands at all. But he kept working, stripping wire from non-essential systems, cannibalizing components from the environmental suits they were not using, jury-rigging connections that would have made any proper engineer cry. Hieri tried to help, but she needed to stay with the cubs. So she kept them warm and fed while Taman worked, occasionally calling out encouragement or bringing him tools when his hands were too numb to search for them himself. By hour 5, Taman could not feel anything below his wrists. His whole body was shaking from the cold. But the repair was almost done. Just one more connection. Just one more seal. Taman, you need to stop, Hieri called from the nest. You're going into hypothermia. Come back and warm up. Almost done, he managed to say through chattering teeth. Now. That's an order. He wanted to argue, but she was right. His vision was starting to blur. His thoughts were getting fuzzy. He made the final connection, sealed it with the last of the sealant foam, and crawled out from under the console. Hieri pulled him into the nest immediately, wrapping him in thermal blankets. The cubs, disturbed by the commotion, crawled over to him. They pressed against his freezing body, and he could feel their warmth even through his numb skin. Check the power, he said. Hieri reached out and looked at the console display. It's holding. Power output is stable. She looked back at him, and there were tears in her eyes. Taman woke to the sound of distressed chirping. For a moment he did not remember where he was. Then the cold air touched his face and everything came rushing back. The shelter, the cubs, day 5. He sat up slowly, his body protesting every movement. His muscles ached from days of cramped sleeping positions. His hands were still sore from the repair work. And his stomach felt like an empty pit. When had he last eaten? Yesterday morning? The day before? Hieri was trying to feed Nari, but the cub was refusing the bottle. She kept turning her head away, making unhappy sounds. Haru and Baum were awake too, both of them restless and fussy. Something's wrong, Hieri said. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and worry. They won't eat. I've tried 3 times in the last hour. Taman took the bottle and examined it. The nutrient solution looked different than it had before. Thinner, watery. Is this the same formula? No, I ran out of 2 of the key compounds yesterday. I had to substitute with other materials. She rubbed her eyes. I knew it wouldn't be as good, but I thought it would at least be acceptable. They're rejecting it. This was bad. The cubs needed to eat every 2 hours. If they went too long without food, they would weaken quickly, and they did not have the supplies to make the old formula anymore. What can we substitute? Taman asked. I've used everything I have. The only protein source left is our ration bars. She gestured helplessly. I tried grinding one up and mixing it in, but the consistency is wrong. And even if I use all our remaining rations, it'll only buy us maybe 2 more days of feeding. Then we use the rations. All of them. Taman, that's our food. If we use it for the cubs, we'll have nothing left for ourselves. We'll survive. The rescue ship arrives tomorrow if they're on schedule. He was already pulling out the ration bars, breaking them into pieces. Show me how to prepare it. Hieri looked like she wanted to argue. But she was too tired, and they both knew there was no other choice. She showed him how to grind the rations into a fine powder, mix it with water and the remaining chemical supplements, and heat it to the right temperature. The new formula was not perfect. It was grainier than the previous version and the color was off. But when Taman offered it to Haru, the cub sniffed it cautiously and then began to drink. Slowly at first, then with more enthusiasm. It's working, Hieri said with relief. They fed all 3 cubs with the new formula. Even Baum, who was usually the pickiest eater, accepted it after some coaxing. When they were done, the cubs settled down to sleep, their bellies full and their fur glowing a contented blue. But Taman and Hieri were left with nothing. They had used the last of their food to feed the cubs. They had maybe half a liter of water left, and rescue was still 24 hours away at minimum. We'll be fine, Taman said, though he was not sure he believed it. 1 day without food won't kill us. Hieri nodded but did not look convinced. They both knew that they had already been eating too little for days. Their bodies were running on empty. 1 more day might not kill them, but it would leave them weak and vulnerable. The day dragged on. Without food to distract from it, the hunger became a constant presence. Taman's stomach hurt. His head ached. He felt dizzy when he stood up too quickly. But he kept working, checking the systems, monitoring the cubs, doing everything that needed to be done. Hieri was suffering too. He could see it in the way she moved, slow and careful as if conserving every bit of energy. She stopped talking as much, focusing all her attention on the cubs and her notes. She was documenting everything, recording data about the cubs' growth and development, about their makeshift formula, about what had worked and what had not. Why bother with the notes? Taman asked during one of the quiet periods when the cubs were sleeping. Because this matters, Hieri said. If we succeed, if these cubs survive, other people need to know how we did it. The Cricks gave up on them. They said it was impossible. But humans didn't give up. That's important information. And if we don't succeed, then someone will find these notes and learn from our mistakes. She smiled sadly. Either way, the data is valuable. On the afternoon of day 5, the fusion cell started acting up again. The power output dropped suddenly, and the temperature in their nest fell by 3 degrees. Taman forced himself to crawl out and check the repairs he had made the previous day. The connections were holding, but the cell itself was struggling. It had been running nonstop for 5 days, pushed beyond its normal operational limits. It was burning through fuel faster than it should, and some of the internal components were showing signs of stress. Taman did what he could. He adjusted settings, rerouted power, and prioritized the heating system over everything else. The lights dimmed to almost nothing. The air circulation slowed to a minimum, but the temperature stabilized. When he crawled back into the nest, Hieri looked at him with concern. You're shaking, just cold, you're pale, and your lips are blue. I'm fine. He was not fine. His whole body felt like it was shutting down. The cold, the hunger, the exhaustion, it was all catching up to him at once. The cubs seemed to sense something was wrong. They crawled over to him, pressing their warm bodies against his chest and stomach. Their purring intensified, a steady vibration that seemed to seep into his bones. Slowly, the shaking subsided. The warmth from their fur helped drive back the cold. They know you're helping them, Hieri said quietly. They're trying to help you back. Taman wrapped his arms gently around the cubs. Haru licked his hand with a rough tongue. Nari nestled under his chin. And Baum, the smallest one, climbed onto his chest and settled directly over his heart. He must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, Hieri was shaking him awake. Taman, wake up! He opened his eyes. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Listen. He listened. At first he heard nothing unusual, just the hum of the life support, the quiet breathing of the cubs, the distant howl of the wind outside. Then he heard it. A new sound. A rhythmic beeping coming from the communication console. Is that the distress beacon? It's active again. Hieri was already at the console, her exhaustion forgotten. The storm must be clearing. The communication systems are coming back online. Taman tried to stand, but his legs would not cooperate. He managed to crawl over to the console. The display showed multiple messages coming through, all time-stamped within the last hour. "It's the rescue ship," Hieri said, reading the messages. "They're in orbit. They're asking for status confirmation." "Taman, they're here. They're actually here." He wanted to feel relief, but all he felt was a strange numbness. "How long until they can pick us up?" "They say 6 hours. They need to wait for the storm to fully clear before they can land." She looked at him. "We made it." "We actually made it." The next 6 hours were the longest of Taman's life. The cubs needed feeding again, and they used the last of the formula. There was nothing left after that. No food, no materials to make more. If rescue had been delayed even one more day, they would have been in serious trouble. But the rescue was not delayed. Exactly 6 hours later, they heard the sound of a ship landing near the outpost. 20 minutes after that, the shelter door opened and Thelix entered, accompanied by 2 other Cricks and a human medic. The Cricks commander stopped in the doorway, his compound eyes taking in the scene. Taman and Hieri, both pale and thin, were sitting in their small nest, and around them were 3 Valrex cubs, healthy and active and very much alive. Haru was trying to climb the equipment containers. Nari was playing with the thermal blanket, pouncing on it with increasing confidence, and Bomb, the smallest cub who should have died on the first night, was curled contentedly in Hieri's lap. "This is impossible," Thelix said in his flat, translated voice. "No," Taman said. His voice was rough from thirst. "It was just difficult." The human medic, a woman named Somin, immediately began checking them over. "You're both severely dehydrated and malnourished," she said. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday," Hieri said. "We used our rations to feed the cubs." Somin looked at her like she was insane. Then she looked at the cubs, who were now investigating the new arrivals with curious chirps. "You gave up your food for them?" "They needed it more," Taman said simply. Somin shook her head in disbelief but started setting up IV lines to get fluids into them. As she worked, Thelix approached the cubs cautiously. He reached out with one of his forearms and let Haru sniff his claw. The cub did not seem afraid at all. "What is their survival rate?" Thelix asked Hieri. 100%, she replied. "All 3 are healthy. They've gained weight. Their vital signs are excellent. They should continue to thrive with proper care." The statistical probability of 3 cubs surviving without their mother, in suboptimal conditions with insufficient resources, was less than 1%. Thelix looked from the cubs to the humans and back again. "How did you achieve this?" Hieri glanced at Taman. He was leaning against the wall, the IV in his arm, looking like he might fall asleep at any moment. But he managed a small smile. "We didn't give up," she said. "That's how." Thelix was silent for a long moment. Then he said something in his native language, a series of clicks and chirps that the translator did not process. His tone, however, carried something that might have been respect. They were evacuated to the rescue ship within the hour. 3 months later, Taman stood on the observation deck of the Veltara research station and watched the sunset paint the purple forests in shades of orange and gold. The station had been rebuilt after the storm, bigger and better than before. New buildings, new equipment, better emergency systems. He had not planned to come back. After the rescue, he had spent 2 weeks in the medical bay recovering from malnutrition and exhaustion. The doctors had cleared him for duty with instructions to take it easy for a while. He could have requested a transfer to any of a dozen safer, more comfortable posts. But when the message came from Hieri asking him to return to Veltara, he had not hesitated. Now he was here waiting for her to finish her work in the lab. The station was different, but some things were the same. The purple forests still stretched to the horizon. The sky still turned that particular shade of amber at sunset. And somewhere out in those forests, 3 Valrex cubs were learning to survive in the wild. "Sorry to keep you waiting," Hieri said, coming onto the observation deck. She looked healthier than the last time he had seen her. Her face had filled out. The dark circles under her eyes were gone. She wore her hair shorter now, practical for field work. "How did the checkup go?" Taman asked. "See for yourself." She pulled out her tablet and showed him video footage. The footage showed 3 Valrex, no longer cubs, but adolescents nearly full grown. They were magnificent. Haru had grown into a powerful creature, his crystalline fur shimmering with deep blue colors. Nari was leaner but fast, her movements quick and precise. And Bomb, the smallest, had grown into a creature of surprising grace, her fur the lightest shade of all. They were playing in a clearing, chasing each other through the undergrowth, practicing the hunting behaviors that would keep them alive. They looked wild and free and perfectly healthy. The reserve is working well, Harry said. They've adapted to living independently. They hunt, they interact with other wildlife. In another 6 months, we'll be able to remove the monitoring collars completely. That's good, Taman said. He watched Bomb on the screen, remembering how small she had been, how she had barely survived that first night. They look happy. They are. And they're not alone. We've identified 2 other Valrex mothers with cubs in the same reserve. If all goes well, we might be seeing a population recovery in the next few years. Hieri paused the video. None of this would have happened if you hadn't stayed. We both stayed. You know what I mean. She looked out at the forests. The Cricks calculated the odds and decided it was not worth the risk. But you made a different calculation. You looked at 3 dying cubs and decided to try anyway. Taman thought about that. I don't think I calculated anything. I just knew I couldn't leave them. That's the difference, isn't it, between humans and most other species. Hieri pulled up another file on her tablet. I've been reading the Cricks reports on human behavior. They're fascinated by us, not because we're smarter or stronger or more advanced, but because we don't always act logically. We make decisions based on emotion, on empathy, on what feels right rather than what the numbers say. Is that a good thing? The Cricks think it is, or at least they're starting to. Thelix wrote a report about what happened in the shelter. It's been distributed to every Cricks research station in the galaxy. He called it the human paradox, how illogical behavior creates superior outcomes. Taman laughed. I'm not sure I want to be a case study. Too late. You're famous in xenobiological circles, the human who saved 3 impossible cubs through sheer stubbornness. She smiled. There's even talk of changing protocols. If a situation like this happens again, they want to know if human solutions might work where Crick's logic fails. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower. The forests were starting to glow as bioluminescent plants activated in the dimming light. It was beautiful in a way that was distinctly alien yet somehow familiar. I got a job offer, Taman said eventually. Security position on a colony ship. Good pay, safe work. I'd be escorting families to a new settlement in the Andromeda sector. Are you going to take it? I don't know. What about you? Are you staying here? Hieri nodded. I'm the head of the Valrex Conservation Project now. It's good work. Important work. But it's also lonely. Most of the Cricks researchers keep their distance. They're polite, but they don't quite know what to make of me after what happened. What about human staff? The station is approved for 6 human personnel now, up from 2. But so far it's just me and Soman, the medic from the rescue ship. Everyone else thinks Veltara is too remote and too dangerous. She glanced at him. Unless you know someone who might be interested in a security position at a frontier research station. Taman felt something settle in his chest, a decision clicking into place. I might know someone. What's the pay like? Terrible. The conditions are harsh. The nearest civilization is 3 weeks away by ship, and there's always a chance of another solar storm. She met his eyes. But the work matters. And you'd be working with people who don't give up when the odds look bad. Sounds perfect, Taman said. They made the arrangements the next day. Taman sent a message declining the colony ship position and accepting the security role at Veltara. It was official. He was staying. 2 weeks later, they took a transport out to the Valrex Reserve for a scheduled monitoring visit. Hieri wanted to check on the cubs one more time, to make sure they were truly thriving without intervention. They found them near the same clearing where the previous footage had been recorded. All 3 were lounging in the late afternoon sun, their fur absorbing the light and glowing brilliantly. They had grown even more in just the short time since the last visit. Hieri set up her scanning equipment at a safe distance. I need to take readings without disturbing them. If they've truly gone wild, they won't remember us. They'll see us as potential threats. But as soon as she finished speaking, Haru lifted his head. His ears swiveled toward them. Then he stood and started walking in their direction. Hieri, Taman said quietly. I think he knows we're here. Nari and Bomb stood as well. All three cubs approached slowly, cautiously. They stopped about 10 meters away, watching the humans with intelligent eyes. Then Bomb made a sound. That same crystalline purr she used to make in the shelter. She took a few more steps forward, her head lowered, her body language indicating she was not being aggressive. "Oh," Yeri breathed. "She remembers." Taman knelt down slowly. "Hey, Bomb, remember me?" The Valrex came closer. She sniffed his hand carefully, her whiskers twitching. Then she pushed her head against his palm, the same way she used to when she was small and scared and needed comfort. Haru and Nari approached as well. Soon all three Valrex were surrounding them, purring and rubbing against them, their glowing fur creating a sphere of blue and purple light. "This is not standard animal behavior," Hieri said, her voice thick with emotion. "They shouldn't remember us. The literature says Valrex don't form permanent bonds with non-family members." "Maybe the literature is wrong," Taman said. He ran his hand along Haru's back, feeling the strange texture of crystalline fur, or maybe the situation was unusual enough to create unusual bonds. They spent an hour with the cubs, though they were not really cubs anymore. They were young adults, capable and strong and wild, but for that hour, they were content to sit with the two humans who had saved their lives, exchanging warmth and affection in a way that defied all scientific understanding. Finally, as the sun began to set, the Valrex pulled away. Haru gave one last rumbling purr. Nari touched her nose to Hieri's hand, and Bomb looked at Taman with those large, intelligent eyes as if to say thank you. Then they turned and melted into the forest, returning to their wild lives. Tamin and Hieri walked back to the transport in silence. There was nothing that needed to be said. They both understood what had just happened. They had witnessed something that should not have been possible according to all known science and logic. But it had happened anyway, because sometimes the heart knows things that the mind cannot calculate. Back at the station, Hieri updated her reports. She documented the encounter, noting the unprecedented behavior, the clear recognition, the obvious emotional bonds. She knew other scientists would be skeptical. They would question her methodology, suggest alternative explanations, point to the statistical improbability of it all. Let them question, she thought. She had learned something important in that shelter during 6 days of impossible survival. Sometimes the most important truths cannot be proven by numbers or logic. Sometimes you just have to trust what you see with your own eyes and feel in your own heart. Taman settled into his new role at the station. He established security protocols, trained the small staff in emergency procedures, and made sure that if another solar storm hit, they would be ready. He also made sure that the backup shelter in Sublevel 3 was fully stocked and maintained, just in case. Months passed, then a year. The Valrex population in the reserve grew steadily. Haru, Nari, and Bomb all reached full maturity. They established their own territories. They hunted successfully. They thrived. And once every few months, when Taman and Hieri visited the reserve, the three Valrex would emerge from the forest.